The galaxy watched in silence as an alien princess offered the empty throne of an ancient empire to a human billionaire who immediately refused it. But the reason behind her choice was more dangerous than the crown itself. Every Aurelian heir had failed to save their civilization, and the only person left was the one who never wanted power. Welcome to Galactic Contact. We hope you enjoy this story and have a wonderful day filled with happiness. Now, let us begin this unforgettable journey among the stars. The galaxy had witnessed the rise and fall of countless rulers, but never had it seen a throne remain empty, because everyone who wanted it was the reason it could not be filled. For 80 years, the Aurelian Empire had avoided collapse through careful compromises. No wars, no rebellions, no single disaster. Only a slow fracture beneath a civilization built on ancient traditions. And then, before billions of watching eyes, Princess Seraphina Vale made the announcement that changed everything. The next ruler of the Aurelian Empire would not be an Aurelian. The next ruler would be Ethan Carter, a human from Earth. The reaction was immediate. Across thousands of worlds, citizens questioned the decision. Noble houses demanded explanations. Political leaders searched for hidden motives. Even Ethan himself believed there had to be a mistake. He was standing inside a quiet conference room on Earth when the official transmission arrived. His name appeared beside the symbol of the Aurelian throne. For several seconds, nobody spoke. "That cannot be real," his advisor finally said. Ethan continued watching the broadcast. The alien princess stood inside the ancient Hall of Succession, surrounded by representatives from every major Aurelian house. Her blue skin reflected the golden lights of the chamber. Silver patterns across her face moved faintly with her breathing. She looked calm, but Ethan noticed the details others missed. The way her hands remained perfectly still. The way she avoided looking directly at the empty throne behind her. She was not making a simple announcement. She was carrying a decision she knew would divide her entire civilization. "Under the authority granted by the Founder's Clause," Seraphina said, "I nominate Ethan Carter of Earth as the next bearer of the Aurelian crown." The words created silence before they created outrage. The Founder's Clause, an ancient legal provision written before the Empire expanded across the stars. A forgotten rule allowing an outsider to be considered when no recognized bloodline could protect the future of the Empire. Most people believed the clause was a historical curiosity. Nobody expected it to ever matter. Until now. Ethan knew enough about politics to understand what it meant. Seraphina was not bypassing tradition. She was using tradition against itself. Every Aurelian successor candidate belonged to a powerful house. Every house had supporters. Every house had enemies. Choosing one would not unite the empire. It would simply decide which faction won. But choosing a human created a different problem. Nobody owned him. Nobody could claim his loyalty through family history. That did not make him trusted. It made him unpredictable. During the emergency council session, Lord Kalen Varesh, leader of the oldest Aurelian house, addressed Ethan directly. His voice was calm, not hostile. "You are an intelligent man, Ethan Carter. Your achievements among humans are undeniable. But intelligence does not create belonging." Ethan looked at the ancient throne displayed behind the council. "I agree." The unexpected answer caused several representatives to pause. Varesh narrowed his eyes. "You agree?" "Yes," Ethan replied. "I am not Aurelian. I do not know your history the way your people do. Pretending otherwise would be disrespectful." The chamber became quieter. "Then why should you stand near a throne that belongs to another civilization?" Ethan looked at the council members. "I do not think the question is whether I belong there." He paused. "I think the question is why your civilization reached a point where nobody who belongs there can sit in it." No one answered immediately. Not because he had solved the problem. He had not. But because he had identified the wound beneath it. Later, when Seraphina met him privately aboard the diplomatic station orbiting Earth, she expected anger. Instead, Ethan studied the succession records she had provided. "You knew this would happen," he said. The princess remained silent. The resistance, the accusations, the political chaos. "Yes," she admitted. "Then why choose me?" Ethan asked. Seraphina looked through the station window at Earth below. "Because everyone who wanted the throne already knew what they would gain from it." She turned toward him. "I needed someone who would first ask what it would cost." Ethan looked back at the empty succession documents. He still had no desire for a crown. But for the first time, he understood the true danger. The throne was not searching for someone powerful enough to take it. It was searching for someone careful enough to question whether anyone should have it at all. Before Ethan Carter ever stepped near the Aurelian throne, he had already learned that success could hide a failure. The galaxy knew him as the human billionaire who connected distant worlds through one of Earth's largest interstellar logistics networks. Investors called him a visionary. Governments called him a strategic partner. But Ethan remembered a different title that nobody used anymore. The man who made a decision that was financially correct and personally impossible to forget. 20 years earlier, before humanity had established major routes beyond its own system, Ethan inherited a struggling industrial division on Earth. The company was losing millions every month. The factories were outdated. The reports were clear. Continuing operations would eventually destroy the entire organization. The solution appeared simple. Close 3 facilities. Merge production. Move resources where they created the highest return. The board approved the plan within hours. The numbers improved exactly as predicted. Within 6 months, the company recovered. The headlines called it a brilliant turnaround. Ethan remembered the people who never appeared in those headlines. He remembered walking through one of the closed facilities after the final day. The machines were silent. The lights were still on, but nobody was working beneath them. A place that had supported families for decades had become an entry in a financial report. One of the former workers approached him outside the building. An older man with tired eyes and a jacket carrying the company logo. "You saved the company," the man said. Ethan expected anger. Instead, the man simply looked at the empty factory. "I just wish someone had saved this place too." Ethan never forgot that sentence. Because the man was right. The decision was necessary. The logic was sound. But the logic was incomplete. That lesson followed Ethan long after his company expanded into space. It changed the way he viewed growth, systems, and leadership. Numbers could reveal problems. They could not always reveal the people living inside those problems. That was why the Aurelian offer disturbed him. A company could survive a mistake. A civilization could not. When Serafina invited him to review the succession records aboard the diplomatic station, Ethan spent hours studying them. He expected ancient history. Instead, he found a pattern. Every potential successor belonged to one of the great Aurelian houses. Each candidate had experience. Each candidate had supporters. Each candidate was also connected to interests that benefited from the current system. "You understand why they will never accept you easily," Serafina said. Ethan looked away from the data. "I understand why they shouldn't." The princess watched him carefully. Most people would argue against that. Most people trying to sit on a throne would. The answer surprised her. Ethan was not trying to prove he deserved power. He was examining whether anyone should have it. Later that evening, Serafina showed him the current condition of the Empire's infrastructure network. The information was classified, but not because it was dangerous. Because it was embarrassing. Thousands of orbital platforms were operating beyond their intended service periods. Several colony supply routes depended on temporary solutions that had become permanent. The Empire was not collapsing from an enemy. It was struggling under the weight of decisions postponed for generations. "You need someone to fix this," Ethan said. Serafina shook her head. "No." She looked at the endless stars outside the window. "We need someone who will admit it needs fixing." Ethan remained silent. The difference mattered. A ruler who believed they could repair everything alone would eventually create another problem. A leader who understood the limits of their own knowledge might build something stronger. Still, Ethan was not convinced. "You chose me because I am outside your system," he said. "Yes. That also means I do not understand it." Serafina nodded. "Correct." Ethan looked at her. "That is a dangerous reason to choose someone." For a moment, the princess said nothing. Then she answered quietly. "It is also the first honest reason anyone has given me in years." Ethan did not accept the throne that night. He did not promise to save the Empire. He had made that mistake once before. Believing a correct answer was enough. This time, he wanted to see the consequences before making a choice. Because if the Aurelian Empire was truly searching for a new ruler, Ethan needed to know one thing first. Was it looking for someone powerful enough to command the stars? Or someone humble enough to understand the cost of touching them? The first time Ethan Carter realized Princess Serafina Vale had not chosen him out of trust was not during the council debates. It was in a quiet room far away from the cameras. when he found a section of the succession archive that had never been included in the documents she gave him. The information was not hidden because it was dangerous. It was hidden because it changed the meaning of everything. Ethan stood before the holographic display, watching centuries of Aurelian history unfold. The official records showed a civilization guided by wisdom, tradition, and carefully balanced leadership. The private records showed something more complicated. Every potential successor had been connected to one of the major political houses. Every candidate carried alliances, obligations, and expectations built over generations. The empire was not lacking capable leaders. It was trapped by leaders who could never escape the interests surrounding them. Ethan continued scrolling until he found the missing section. The Founder's Clause. The same ancient law that allowed an outsider to inherit the throne under extreme circumstances. But there was another condition. The candidate had to be evaluated without interference from the royal family. No private negotiations. No hidden agreements. No personal selection. Ethan looked at the document again. Then he looked at Serafina standing across the room. You knew this existed. The princess did not answer immediately. That silence told him enough. Yes. Ethan turned away from the display. And you still asked me before telling me? Serafina remained still. Her blue skin reflected the cold light from the archive panels. The unusual patterns along her face shifted slightly as she controlled her expression. I needed to know something first. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Whether I wanted power? No, her voice was quieter. Whether you would question it. The answer did not satisfy him. You tested me. Yes. There was no excuse in her voice. No attempt to soften the truth. I did. Ethan walked toward the window overlooking the diplomatic station. Below them, Earth moved silently through the darkness. You understand why that is a problem? Yes. Because if I become your ruler, trust cannot begin with a test. Serafina lowered her gaze. For the first time since they met, she looked less like a princess and more like someone who had been carrying a decision alone for too long. You are right. Ethan expected an explanation. Instead, he received acceptance. That mattered. Why did you really choose me? He asked. Serafina approached the display and brought up the succession map. Hundreds of regions. Thousands of representatives. Every faction connected through generations of agreements. Because every Aurelian candidate has already inherited a position before inheriting the throne. She touched the names of the great houses. Their loyalty is divided. Not because they are dishonest. Because they are responsible for the people who supported them. Ethan studied the information. And you think I have no obligations? You do, she said. Just different ones. A pause followed. Your company. Your people. Your own history. Ethan looked at her. Then why choose someone with weaknesses? Serafina's expression changed slightly. Because someone who believes they have no weaknesses is the person I fear most. The answer stayed between them. It was not admiration. It was not friendship. It was something more fragile. Recognition. But Ethan still had doubts. You are asking me to enter a civilization I do not belong to and fix problems I did not create. Serafina looked toward the empty stars outside the station. No, she turned back. I am asking you to decide whether you can help build something that neither of us can create alone. Ethan remained silent. He thought about the factory from his past. The workers who paid the price of a decision made by someone who only saw numbers. He thought about the empire before him. A civilization that had optimized stability for so long that it had forgotten how to adapt. If I accept, he said, I will not promise to save the empire. Serafina nodded. Good. I will make mistakes. Everyone does. And some people will hate my decisions. They should question you, she replied. That is how leaders remain accountable. Ethan looked at the succession records again. For the first time, the throne did not look like an opportunity. It looked like a responsibility with a cost nobody could fully predict. He still did not know whether he would accept. But he finally understood the truth behind Serafina's choice. She had not searched the galaxy for someone worthy of a crown. She had searched for someone willing to admit that a crown was never enough. The first world Ethan Carter visited after agreeing to consider the throne was not the shining capital of the Aurelian Empire. Serafina did not take him to the royal districts, the ancient archives, or the places where history was carefully preserved. She took him to Nera, 7, a colony most citizens only saw as a declining number in an economic report. The transport descended through a thin gray atmosphere, passing abandoned orbital platforms and aging communication arrays. From above, the colony looked functional. That was the problem. Nothing was completely broken. Everything was simply running longer than it was supposed to. The landing platform shook slightly as the transport connected. Ethan stepped outside and immediately noticed the sound. The quiet hum of overworked machinery. The vibration of systems operating beyond their intended limits. It reminded him of old factories on Earth. Places where people kept broken things alive because replacing them was impossible. Cale Oren, the chief maintenance engineer, waited beside the landing area. He recognized Serafina immediately. His expression changed when he noticed Ethan. "We were not informed this was an official inspection," Cale said. Ethan looked around at the workers repairing equipment nearby. "Good." Cale looked confused. "Good. If people know important visitors are coming, they usually show the best version of the problem." Ethan glanced toward the aging infrastructure. "I want the real one." The engineers studied him for a moment before leading them inside. The energy facility beneath the colony stretched for several miles. It was advanced technology by human standards, but Ethan quickly saw the warning signs. Replacement components from different generations. Emergency patches that had become permanent solutions. Systems maintained not because they were efficient, but because people had become experts at keeping them alive. "How long has this reactor been operating beyond its recommended service period?" Ethan asked. Cale checked the maintenance records. 14 years. "And the replacement request?" The engineer gave a tired smile. "Submitted 12 years ago." Ethan looked at Serafina. She did not defend the Empire. She simply watched. She already knew what he was seeing. The problem was not technology. The problem was distance. Decisions made thousands of light years away looked different from the ground. Later that day, Ethan reviewed Nara 7's official reports. The colony had declining productivity, increasing maintenance costs, lower projected economic value. Any business system would identify it as an inefficient operation. But when Ethan visited the residential areas, the numbers changed meaning. Families had built lives around limited resources. Workers had developed solutions that were never recorded in official databases. A small transport route that appeared unnecessary on paper carried medical supplies to isolated settlements. A local repair network that looked outdated prevented larger failures. The colony was not inefficient. It was surviving under conditions created by decisions made elsewhere. "You understand why some people believe the Empire is failing them," Serafina said while they walked through the colony. Ethan watched a technician repairing an old machine with carefully reused parts. "I understand why they believe nobody sees them." The princess looked at him. "Is there a difference?" Ethan paused. "Yes." He looked at the workers around them. Being abandoned means someone chose to leave you behind. Being forgotten means people stopped looking. The distinction stayed with Serafina, because that was the problem she feared most. The Empire was not cruel. It was distracted. It had grown so large that individual lives became invisible inside massive systems. That evening, Ethan met with the colony representatives. They expected promises. They expected speeches. Instead, he asked questions. How long did repairs take? Which supply routes mattered most? Which decisions from the capital created the biggest problems? Some leaders found his approach strange. A future ruler was supposed to provide answers, not collect problems. After the meeting, Serafina watched him review the colony data again. "You are not acting like someone preparing to rule." Ethan looked at the information. "That is because I am not sure ruling is what this place needs." She remained silent. "A ruler can make decisions," Ethan continued. "But a leader has to understand what those decisions touch." The princess looked toward the colony lights scattered across the dark landscape. For generations, Aurelian rulers had protected the empire by standing above its problems. Ethan was doing something different. He was walking into them. And for the first time in years, Serafina wondered if the empire's greatest weakness was not a lack of power. Maybe it was the distance between those who made decisions and those who lived with them. The mistake did not come from a lack of intelligence. That was what made it harder for Ethan Carter to accept. The numbers were correct. The projections were accurate. Every model showed the same result. His first major reform as a potential Aurelian ruler would improve the empire's failing supply network by 12% within 18 months. It was the kind of solution that had built his reputation on Earth. Identify inefficiency, remove waste, strengthen the system. The proposal was simple. Too simple. Ethan presented the plan before the Imperial Council, expecting resistance. Instead, he found something more dangerous. Agreement. Representatives who had questioned him weeks earlier now supported the idea. The economic projections were undeniable. Several colony administrators believed the changes could finally stabilize their regions. Even Lord Kalen Varesh admitted the proposal had technical merit. Your analysis is difficult to challenge, Varesh said. The resources are being misallocated. Ethan nodded. Exactly. For the first time, he felt he was proving he belonged. He had found the problem. He had found the solution. Then Serafina asked one question. Which colonies disappear from your model? The chamber became silent. Ethan looked back at the projection. Disappear? Not physically, she replied. Strategically. He reviewed the data again. At first, he saw nothing wrong. The system combined smaller colonies into larger regional groups. Efficiency increased. Transportation costs decreased. Resource usage improved. Then he noticed what the model had removed. Individual communities. Small settlements. Locations that did not create enough economic value to remain visible in a centralized system. They are still included in the regional numbers, Ethan said. Serafina looked at him. Numbers are not the same as lives. The words struck him harder than any accusation could have, because he had heard them before. Not from a princess, not from a council, from an old worker standing outside a closed factory on Earth. The same mistake, a different scale. Ethan had optimized the system while forgetting the people inside it. He canceled the proposal before the final vote. The decision shocked the council. Some believed he was protecting his reputation. Others believed he was admitting weakness. Ethan did not explain himself publicly. Instead, he returned to Nera, 7. Alone. He walked through the same maintenance corridors where Kale had shown him the invisible parts of the colony. The repair routes. The emergency networks. The systems that looked inefficient because they were measured by people who never needed them. Kale found him examining the old transport schedules. You changed your mind, the engineer said. Ethan looked at the data. I changed my understanding. The engineer waited. The plan was logical, Ethan continued. But it was built around what was easiest to measure. Kale nodded slowly. That happens often. Ethan looked at the aging equipment around them. Too often. He spent 3 days with the colony workers. Not giving speeches. Not announcing solutions. Listening. The final report he sent to the council was very different from his original proposal. The network would still be reorganized, but not through simple consolidation. Critical routes would receive protection based on social importance, not only economic output. The empire would measure resilience, not just efficiency. When Serafina read the revised plan, she found Ethan waiting in the diplomatic chamber. You know this will make the reform slower, she said. Ethan nodded. Yes. And more expensive. Yes. Then why choose it? Ethan looked at the stars outside the window. Because the cheapest system is not always the strongest system. Serafina remained quiet. You were wrong, she said. Ethan accepted the statement. Yes. And you corrected yourself. He looked at her. I had to. A small silence followed. No, Serafina said. You chose to. That distinction mattered. Many leaders changed because they were forced. Ethan changed because he understood the cost of refusing to. Later that evening, Lord Varesh reviewed the revised proposal. He did not praise it immediately. He simply studied the changes. You removed your own advantage, he said. Ethan looked confused. What advantage? Varesh pointed to the original model. A faster result would have made you appear successful. Ethan looked down at the document. Success is not useful if the people paying for it are the ones nobody counts. For the first time, Varesh did not see Ethan as an outsider trying to replace Aurelian leadership. He saw something more complicated. A person who had made the same mistake as previous rulers, but unlike them, had stopped before protecting the mistake itself. The empire had spent generations fearing change because change created uncertainty. Ethan was learning something different. Sometimes refusing to change created a greater danger. And sometimes the first sign of leadership was not having the right answer. It was knowing when the answer you had was not enough. Serafina Vale had spent her entire life believing that sacrifice was the highest form of leadership. Every lesson she received as a child, every political training session, every moment inside the royal halls taught her the same principle. A ruler carried the burden so others would not have to. A ruler stood alone when everyone else needed protection. She never questioned that belief. until Ethan Carter did. The turning point came when the emergency request from the outer colonies reached the Imperial Council. A deteriorating energy station on the border worlds required immediate intervention. The cost was significant. The location had little strategic value. According to the official models, delaying the repair would save resources until the Empire completed its larger infrastructure plan. Serafina read the report once. Then she approved the emergency funding herself. Ethan discovered the decision before the council did. He found her in the navigation chamber reviewing the allocation records. "You authorized the transfer from the Royal Reserve," he said. Serafina did not look up. "Yes." Without waiting for the council vote. "Yes." Ethan studied the data. "You know what this does politically?" The princess continued reading. "Yes." There was no hesitation. That bothered him more than an argument would have. "You are risking your position before the succession decision is complete." Serafina finally looked at him. "The colony workers do not have the luxury of waiting for my political safety." Ethan remained silent. He understood the choice. But he also saw the pattern. She was doing exactly what she had always done, taking responsibility alone. The repair mission revealed the scale of the problem. The energy station was not failing because the technology was outdated. It was failing because every temporary solution had become permanent. Engineers had stretched the life of components far beyond their expected limits. Maintenance teams had created workarounds that were never added to official records. The system survived because people quietly carried the weight nobody wanted to see. While the council representatives debated accountability, Ethan walked directly to the engineers. "What do you need?" he asked. The lead technician hesitated. "A complete replacement system." Ethan looked at the damaged infrastructure. "And the realistic answer?" The technician glanced around the facility. "A phased repair plan that keeps the colony running while we rebuild." Ethan nodded. "Good. Let's start there." After the plan was approved, Ethan found Serafina outside the station. The colony's artificial night reflected across her blue skin. The unusual patterns along her face were almost motionless, but Ethan noticed the exhaustion she tried to hide. "You knew this would hurt your position," he said. She looked toward the distant stars. "A position is temporary." That sounds like something a person says after sacrificing everything. She did not answer. Ethan stepped closer. "Why do you always assume the cost has to be paid by you?" Serafina looked at him. For a moment, the princess disappeared. There was only someone who had carried responsibility for too long. "Because someone has to." Ethan shook his head. "That is how systems fail." Her expression changed slightly. "You disagree?" "I think any system that depends on one person destroying themselves to function is already broken." The words were quiet. Not a criticism. Not an accusation. A reflection of something Ethan understood personally. He had spent years believing he could solve every problem if he worked harder. He had learned the cost of that belief. "You think leadership means avoiding sacrifice," Serafina said. Ethan looked at the workers repairing the station below them. "No. I think leadership means deciding what should never be sacrificed." The princess followed his gaze. For centuries, Aurelian rulers had protected their people by carrying every burden themselves. But maybe that was not strength. Maybe it was a failure to build something stronger than one person. When they returned to the capital, Serafina reviewed the succession documents again. This time, she did not search for reasons she had to carry the empire alone. She searched for ways to make sure nobody ever had to. Ethan noticed the change, but said nothing. Some lessons could not be taught through arguments. They had to be discovered through the moment someone finally admitted they were tired of standing alone. And for the first time, the princess who once believed she had to save an entire civilization began learning the harder truth. A leader's greatest achievement was not carrying the weight of the world. It was building a world where others could help carry it. The final debate over the future of the Aurelian Empire was not fought with weapons. It was fought with memories, fears, and the weight of decisions made by generations before them. Inside the Imperial Council chamber, every representative understood that the choice before them was larger than one human and one throne. It was a question that had followed civilizations for thousands of years. How much of the past should be protected when the future requires something different? Lord Kalen Varesh stood among the traditional houses. His family had served the empire for over 6 centuries. They had maintained trade routes, protected border settlements, and preserved knowledge during difficult eras. He was not a villain. Ethan understood that immediately. That made the disagreement harder. You speak of reform as if tradition is the enemy, Varesh said. Ethan looked across the chamber. I don't. Then what do you believe? Ethan paused before answering. I believe tradition exists because it solved a problem once. The question is whether that same problem still exists today. The council remained silent. Varesh stepped closer to the central display. It showed the Empire's infrastructure network, political regions, and resource distribution. You see inefficiency, Varesh said. I see history. Ethan nodded. Both can be true. That answer surprised many representatives. They expected conflict. They expected the human outsider to dismiss everything that came before him. Instead, he acknowledged the reason the system existed. The Empire had not been built by foolish people. It had been built by people solving the problems of their own time. The danger was assuming those solutions would remain perfect forever. The debate continued for hours. Some argued the Empire needed a stronger central authority. Others believed more local independence was necessary. Ethan listened more than he spoke. That bothered some representatives. A candidate for the throne was expected to demonstrate certainty. But Ethan had learned that certainty without understanding created the most expensive mistakes. Then a representative from a remote colony asked the question everyone had avoided. Why should we trust someone who is not one of us? The chamber became quiet. Ethan looked toward the speaker. You shouldn't trust me because I am human. Several representatives watched carefully. You shouldn't trust me because I have money or because I built successful companies. He looked at the records surrounding them. Trust should come from what I do after making a decision. The representative frowned. And if your decision is wrong? Ethan answered without hesitation. Then I should be held responsible. The simplicity of the answer changed the room. Not because it was inspiring, because it was uncomfortable. True authority always carried consequences. Many leaders wanted the ability to decide. Fewer accepted the obligation that followed. Later, Lord Varesh met Ethan privately outside the council chamber. The older Aurelian leader studied him for several moments. You know, I expected arrogance from you. Ethan gave a small smile. That would have made things easier. Varesh almost smiled. Perhaps. He looked toward the empty throne room. You are unusual because you do not seem interested in winning. Ethan followed his gaze. I am interested in preventing everyone from losing. The answer stayed with Varesh. The traditional leader did not suddenly change his beliefs. He still valued stability. He still feared careless reform. But he began to understand something important. Ethan was not trying to erase Aurelian identity. He was trying to ensure there was still an Aurelian future. When the final succession vote began, the result was uncertain until the final moments. Some houses supported Ethan. Some opposed him. Many remained undecided until they considered one final detail. Ethan had never promised perfection. He had promised accountability. The vote passed. Not unanimously. Not easily, but legitimately. When the chamber emptied, Serafina stood beside Ethan near the ancient throne. You realize this does not mean they trust you completely, she said. Ethan looked at the seat of power before them. Good. She looked at him. Good. If they trust me completely, they are probably not paying enough attention. For the first time in weeks, Serafina allowed herself to smile. The galaxy expected a human to claim a throne. Instead, it witnessed something far more unusual. A person accepting power while openly admitting its limits. And that was the moment the Aurelian Empire began to understand why the outsider had been chosen. Not because he knew how to command the stars, but because he knew nobody should ever own them. The day Ethan Carter accepted the Aurelian crown was not remembered because a human finally reached an alien throne. It was remembered because the throne itself changed. For 8 centuries, the Aurelian crown represented absolute continuity. The ruler inherited the past, protected tradition, and carried authority above all others. Ethan's first request after the succession vote was to remove the one thing everyone expected him to protect most: absolute power. The announcement shocked the Empire. Before the coronation ceremony began, Ethan stood before the Imperial Council and presented the final condition of his acceptance. The throne cannot continue as it has existed. The chamber became silent. Representatives from every region watched carefully. Some believed this was the moment the human would reveal his ambition. Instead, he revealed his limits. The crown will no longer hold unrestricted authority over the empire, Ethan continued. The ruler must answer to the people affected by every decision. Lord Kalen Varesh studied him from across the chamber. You are asking to weaken the very position you are about to receive. Ethan looked toward the ancient throne behind him. No, I am protecting it from becoming something it was never meant to be. The council displayed concern. A weakened monarchy could create instability. Rival factions could attempt to exploit the transition. Centuries of political balance depended on careful control. Ethan understood those fears. He had spent his life building systems where one mistake could affect thousands of people. But he also understood something else. A system that depended entirely on one person being perfect was not a strong system. It was a fragile one. The reforms were not accepted easily. Several noble houses opposed the changes. Some citizens feared that removing traditional authority would create uncertainty. Others believed uncertainty was necessary because the old stability had hidden too many problems. Serafina watched the debates from the side of the chamber. Years earlier, she would have tried to convince everyone herself. She would have carried the argument, defended every choice, and absorbed every criticism. This time, she did something different. She listened. When questioned, she allowed others to answer. When challenged, she did not immediately defend the past. Ethan noticed. It was a small change. But small changes were often where civilizations began moving. During the final ceremony, the crown was brought into the chamber. Ancient symbols covered its surface. Generations of Aurelian rulers had worn it as proof of inherited authority. Ethan took it in his hands, but did not place it on his head immediately. Instead, he looked at the representatives around him. A crown is a reminder, he said. Not that one person stands above everyone else, but that one person will always be responsible for the consequences of their decisions. The ceremony continued. Serafina placed the crown upon him. Her expression remained calm, but Ethan saw the emotion she carefully controlled. This was not the loss of her family's legacy. It was the transformation of that legacy into something larger. Later that evening, the two stood together in the royal gardens overlooking the capital. The city stretched beneath them, filled with ships, lights, and countless lives that would never know their names. You changed the meaning of the throne, Serafina said quietly. Ethan looked at the distant stars. No, he paused. The people who questioned it changed the meaning. I only listened. She studied him for a moment. You know, most rulers would take credit. Ethan gave a small smile. Most rulers probably need to be reminded why they were chosen. For the first time, Serafina laughed softly. Not as a princess, not as a symbol, just as someone who finally felt the weight she had carried begin to leave her shoulders. Across the galaxy, the news spread quickly. A human had become the leader of the Aurelian Empire. But the story was never truly about a human gaining power over an alien civilization. It was about a civilization realizing power was never meant to belong to one person. The crown remained. The throne remained. The empire remained. But the distance between those who ruled and those who lived beneath those decisions began to disappear. And that was the moment the galaxy witnessed something it had never expected. Humanity's greatest strength was not its ability to reach the stars. It was its willingness to remember the people still standing below them. 10 years after Ethan Carter accepted the Aurelian crown, historians still argued about the moment that changed the empire. Some claimed it was the day a human became ruler of an alien civilization. Others believed it was the day the monarchy surrendered absolute control. But those who lived through the transition remembered something simpler. The empire did not change because a human sat on a throne. It changed because millions of people realized the throne was never the source of their future. The first decade of Ethan's leadership was not peaceful because everyone agreed. It was peaceful because disagreement finally had a place inside the system. The reforms moved slowly, sometimes painfully. Old political structures did not disappear overnight. Some noble houses continued to oppose Ethan's decisions. Some colonies remained skeptical. But the empire stopped hiding its problems. Every major decision became public. Every resource allocation could be questioned. Every leader, including Ethan himself, had to explain not only what they decided, but why. For a civilization that had spent centuries measuring strength through certainty, accountability felt unfamiliar. During his final public address as first regent, Lord Kalen Varesh stood beside Ethan. The two had disagreed more times than anyone could count. Their debates became famous throughout the empire. Some citizens expected them to become enemies. Instead, they became an example of something rarer. Two people who could disagree without seeing each other as threats. You know, Varesh said quietly before the ceremony began. Many expected me to spend my final years fighting against your reforms. Ethan adjusted the ceremonial cloak resting on his shoulders. I expected that too. Varesh looked toward the crowd below. But you made a mistake I never expected. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Which one? You listened. For a moment, neither spoke. The statement carried more weight than a compliment, because listening had become the foundation of everything that followed. Years later, Serafina visited the old Hall of Succession. The chamber looked almost unchanged. The same ancient walls, the same empty spaces where generations of rulers had stood. But one thing was different. The throne was no longer elevated above the chamber. The reforms had physically lowered its position, not enough to remove its importance, enough to remove its distance. Ethan found her there, studying the old symbols carved into the floor. You still come here, he said. Serafina turned. The years had changed her, but the calm intelligence in her eyes remained. So do you? He smiled slightly. I suppose we are both still trying to understand what we created. She looked toward the throne. Do you ever regret accepting it? Ethan considered the question. He had learned not to answer quickly. I regret believing I could understand everything when I started. Serafina waited. But not accepting? Ethan looked around the chamber. No, a quiet moment passed. Why? She asked. Ethan touched the edge of the old ceremonial table, the same place where countless rulers had once signed decisions that affected entire worlds. Because I learned something. He looked toward the stars beyond the chamber windows. Power is not dangerous because people want it. Serafina listened. Power is dangerous when people stop asking who pays the price for it. The princess smiled faintly. It was the same lesson she had needed years earlier. The same lesson Ethan had learned on Earth before he ever reached the stars. A civilization was not defined by the perfection of its leaders. It was defined by its ability to correct them. In the centuries that followed, children in both human and Aurelian schools studied the era of the first human ruler. They learned about the political reforms, the infrastructure recovery, the alliance between species. But the lesson repeated most often was not about a crown or a throne. It was about a choice. When offered unimaginable power, Ethan Carter had not asked how high he could rise. He had asked how many people would be affected by the decisions made from that height. And that was why the galaxy remembered him. Not because a human reached the stars, not because a human ruled an alien empire, but because when humanity was given the chance to stand above others, it chose instead to stand with them. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this journey among the stars. We would love to hear your thoughts and feelings about this story, so please share them in the comments below. Subscribe to Galactic Contact for more unforgettable sci-fi tales, where humanity's kindness reaches beyond the boundaries of the universe.